in our ever-changing world. From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Issues of Faith.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Issues of Faith. Very good show today. We are talking to the new dean of the Vanderbilt University Divinity School. Dr. Emilie Towns is with us. And Dr. Towns, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for giving us this chance to get to know you better. And so let's start with just your entire background, your faith background.
Thank you.
Yes.
The entire background might not be repeatable to all audiences.
Well, good. Did you go to church as a child? And just what's your faith background?
Yes, I was raised in the United Methodist Church, Asbury Temple United Methodist Church, the little church by the side of the road where everybody's somebody and Christ is the Lord. And was raised in that church until basically I left for college. But like a lot of teenagers in the early 70s, I found at some point the church wasn't answering my questions, wasn't welcoming my questions. So my parents gave me the freedom to explore God outside of the church. So I would take my mother's car every Sunday morning and drive to Duke Woods, because we lived in Durham, North Carolina, and there was a bluff that I found that had a river running below it and nature all around it, and I would sit there for an hour and just talk to God.
Now that's very interesting. If the church wasn't answering your questions or allowing you to ask the questions you wanted to ask, that you would then turn to theology as a career. How did that happen? So you asked those questions in that private place, and is that when you began to think, this is what I want to do?
No, not at all. I was just looking for a place to find the holy. I knew, given all that was going on in the high schools, where we were the first generation of desegregation in our town, and all of the pushes and pulls we had with the Black Panthers, with the Communist Workers' Party, with the Ku Klux Klan. There was a lot going on, and I somehow knew, and I think it was because of the upbringing I got from my parents and my grandmother, that the place where I could find centeredness was in God. So God was never the question. The question was the church. And so that gave me the freedom to know I could ask God all kinds of questions. Because, when you're out in the woods, you can ask a lot of stuff that you might not ask in the four walls of a church. And I went on to college at the University of Chicago, did much like many students of my age and probably today, couldn't find a major, cast about in several different ones. I was sitting talking to a secretary in the physical science division of the college and saying, I really want a major where there are always questions and you never run out of them. And we both looked at each other at the same time and said, religion. So we pulled out the catalog to see if there was even a religion major. And it turned out the office of the master for the religion major was right next door to where we were. I grew up in a world where there are signs and symbols. That seemed like a sign. So I went over, talked to him. He said, welcome aboard. You can major. And here we believe if you can make a case for a course having to do with something in the world of religion, you can take it and it counts towards your major. So I was off and running, but I still wasn't convinced that that's what I'd do, because I thought I wanted to be a lawyer and save the world. And I also played varsity basketball in college. And I had a nasty habit of busting up my knee. And so I was sitting in my dorm room one day in a full leg cast, looking out as people were coming to and fro from class. And I was reading the Autobiography of Saint Teresa of Avila, which is a very interesting read. She's someone who kind of had this love affair with Jesus. And some of the passages were mildly erotic. So you sort of like read a little bit of her and just go sit back and go, whoa. So I hit one of those passages, and I was just sort of looking out the window because I needed a break. And I was thinking, should I go to law school or should I go to divinity school? And a man's voice said to me, you should go to divinity school. Well, I thought it was my best friend Norman, who had come in the room while I was reading. And so I turned around to look for him and say, how did you know that's what I was thinking? Well, the door was closed. Nobody was there.
So it was that powerful? It was
that powerful. And even more, outside it had been a very calm day. And all of a sudden, this huge wind kicked up. And I thought, well, I don't need much more of a sign than that. So I went down the hallway, told one of my classmates, it's been decided, I'm going to divinity school, wheeled around, hobbled back down the hallway with my crutches, sat down and started reading again. It was finished.
Wow. And I see that one of your areas of study is womanist ethics.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? What is womanist ethics?
Well, ethics is probably the easier one to tackle. And that's when, for me, I actually look in the area of social ethics in Christianity. So I am looking at big problems, things like racism, healthcare, sexism, homophobia, and trying to understand how we as individuals can either make that better or make it worse, and the decision making we do around it. So that's sort of ethics. Womanist is adapted from Alice Walker's book of essays, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, which she subtitles Womanist Prose. And her editor said, what's that? And so she came up with a 4-part definition that really talks about the way older black women teach younger black women how to survive, and the fact that many young black girls grow up much faster than they should because they have to, facing a racist and sexist society oftentimes. Another part of the definition talks about the community and how black folk have historically tried to take care of each other, and that there has been in the black community always a need for separatism for men and for women. And sometimes, as Alice Walker says, you love women sexually or not, or men sexually or not, but the whole point is that you take care of the community. A third part of the definition looks at issues of beauty and how most black women don't fit into that norm, as most white women don't either. And says, loves food and roundness, loves herself regardless. And the last definition is the shortest one and the easiest to remember, in which Walker says, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. And so what a group of us did in the early 80s was take that definition and try to understand how we can apply then an analysis that includes race and class and gender and sex and sexuality and all manner of things depending on what you do, and use that as the bottom line for then doing ethics.
You grew up in the civil rights era.
Yes, I did. Or the last bit of it.
The last bit of it. How has that shaped your view of the role of churches today? And saying that, not all churches acted perfectly back then. No. And there are all kinds of disagreements, issues, arguments going on today. Mm-hmm. How has that time shaped your view of what churches did and should do? How does that affect your thought?
Well, the church, Asbury Temple, I grew up with, and the pastor that really formed me was Doug Moore. And Doug Moore was very, very active in the civil rights movement in Durham, and very, very active in creating a deep spirituality in the church. So I was formed in a world where spirituality and social witness were, you just put them together, you didn't pull them apart. And that's the church I keep looking for. That's the church I try to teach my students about when they come into my classroom. That's the church that I hope, and I think Vanderbilt Divinity School also is trying to form students to help recreate and create. And part of the reason I left was because Doug left, and the pastors we got afterwards were either all civil rights or all spirituality. And so it was like a listing ship, and I wanted to be centered. I wanted that centering I had up until I was about 10 or 12 years old. By that time it had taken root. And so that's the church I hope we can be.
What is the appropriate role of the church in some of the big issues of the days when it comes to the homosexuality issue and when it comes to women's issues and that kind of thing? What's the role of the church?
I think the role of the church, one of the primary roles of the church, is to be the sounding board for the congregation. One of the things that I absolutely believe the church must be is a place where its members and the community it sits in, and even wider if it can be, is a place where they can get information. And not just one side of the equation, but bring out the whole picture. Have folks be able to ask their questions and know that they're going to hear not just one party line, but the possibilities. And in the midst of that, that's where the ministerial staff and the lay leaders then come in to help people say, okay, now that you've heard all this, let's talk about how we want to be responsive to the issues of the day.
There are some who say the Bible is very definitive here, and there aren't two sides, and when you come to church, you're going to hear this.
Yeah. I tend to disagree with them. I think the Bible is an incredible resource that doesn't always give us one answer. If we keep looking, we will see something counter to what another passage says. That's what I think is so wonderful about the way that God gives us the sense of free will to say, okay, you've given us this resource. It's got everybody from David, who kills his best man's wife in order to have her, and yet is considered a great king. That's a little shaky. To Jesus, who dies for us on the cross, to Mary and Martha. I mean, there's a whole host of characters in there who are very human, and the only one who's fully divine is Jesus. So what does he say to us? What does he actually say to us about any of the issues? Or is he giving us a kind of template to apply to our lives, to ask those questions, to be bold? So I don't see the Bible as a rule book, and many people do. And that's interesting for an ethicist to say. But for me, the Ten Commandments is not a list of rules. It's a covenant response. It's a response that the people of Israel have now to their deliverance. So I want to open the Bible up. I believe in fearless Bible study. And
there are some denominations, and I'll ask this, then we'll go to a break, but there's some large denominations that want to limit the role of women based on what is in the Bible. They're standing by what they are reading in the Bible. You're obviously a leader and a woman. What do you think about that, and how do you respond to that?
Well, I want them to also look at some of the passages in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and all of us who are meat eaters, and do a few other things that we're not supposed to do, but somehow those people can be ordained. That's what I mean about the diversity of the Bible. It's not a rule book. It gives us a lot of examples of people behaving well and behaving badly. And in that, we're asked to go to God in prayer, in community, and try to figure out what is the faithful response for us now. How are we to be the ones that God is looking for to lead these new generations into the future?
it's a fascinating time in the church. And so, all right, we're going to take a break and come back and see what are some of the biggest challenges facing clergy today and just where you want to take the Divinity School. Take a break
great.
and be back right after this.